On February 19th, 1945, a pale light crept over the jagged ridges of Iwo Jima. The wind carried the sharp scent of salt and volcanic ash, and the stillness of dawn was broken by distant artillery booms. From the American beachheads, armored silhouettes crawled over cliffs and rocky slopes, their engines growling against the impossible terrain. Marines crouched behind jagged boulders, rifles ready, eyes tracing the armored columns as they climbed. In Japanese observation posts high above, commanders stared in disbelief. Tanks, massive steel behemoths, were moving where no one had thought they could. "Impossible," one muttered, scanning the horizon as the first Sherman tanks crested the volcanic ridges, smoke trailing behind their engines. Machine gun nests, carefully concealed, now faced a new threat. A weapon they had assumed could never operate here. The mountain steepness had been their fortress, the terrain their ally. Yet here, amid mud and stone, American ingenuity defied expectation. Every rumble of the treads sent shock waves through entrenched positions, a signal that the battle would not be fought on terms anyone had predicted. And in those first moments, the course of the assault and the island was quietly, irreversibly changing. By early 1945, the Pacific War had reached a stage of grinding intensity. The United States had steadily advanced across island after island, a strategy designed to bring the fight closer to Japan's home islands. Battles at Saipan, Tarawa, and Peleliu had already shown the high cost of amphibious assaults, particularly against Japanese defenders who had mastered the art of fortifying every inch of terrain. Yet none of these islands had the volcanic, jagged ridges that defined Iwo Jima. Its black sand beaches, steep cliffs, and labyrinthine network of caves and tunnels made it a natural fortress, one that Japanese commanders believed could resist any conventional attack. Japanese defensive doctrine emphasized terrain as a force multiplier. Commanders had learned from previous campaigns that rigid beach defenses alone were insufficient. Instead, they created interlocking positions in high ground, using caves and ridges to conceal machine gun nests, artillery, and sniper positions. Every approach was meticulously mapped and mined. The steep slopes were considered impassable to armored vehicles, and for years, Japanese officers confidently assumed that no tank could climb the volcanic ridges. Artillery could rain down, infantry could advance, but armored support would be effectively useless. Meanwhile, the Americans studied the island carefully. Engineers and tacticians analyzed topographic maps, photographs from aerial reconnaissance, and intelligence from prior assaults. The challenge was clear. To take Iwo Jima, Marines would need to neutralize entrenched defenders positioned on high ridges, often hundreds of feet above the beaches. Infantry assaults alone promised horrific casualties. Commanders debated alternatives: artillery bombardments, air strikes, flamethrowers, but each method had limits against the network of caves and tunnels. The battle plan emphasized combined arms coordination. Infantry, artillery, naval gunfire, and air support would work in concert. Yet even with overwhelming firepower, the Americans faced an enemy deeply familiar with the island's terrain. Every boulder, ridge, and tunnel provided cover for defenders who were willing to fight to the last man. The Japanese forces, commanded by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had abandoned conventional tactics for a defensive strategy built around patience, concealment, and attrition. Kuribayashi understood the strategic impossibility of defeating the American fleet at sea, so his focus was to make the invasion costly enough to influence American public opinion. American planners, however, refused to accept the notion that mountains were impassable. Experimental efforts had already demonstrated that light armored vehicles could traverse steep inclines under specific conditions, though nothing on the scale of an island assault had been attempted. Engineers designed modifications for Sherman tanks, wider tracks for better grip, reinforced suspensions to handle jagged rock, and improved engines to maintain speed on steep gradients. At the same time, Marines underwent rigorous training to operate in close coordination with armor under extreme conditions. Communication drills, signaling techniques, and joint assault exercises became central to preparation. The stage was set for a confrontation of innovation against expectation. Japanese commanders observed the Americans methodically, confident that terrain would remain a decisive ally. American officers, conversely, calculated every slope, every ridge, and every possible path of advance, willing to challenge assumptions that had stood untested for decades. It was a quiet duel of strategy before the first shots were fired. One side relying on centuries of experience with mountain fortifications, the other betting on adaptability, engineering ingenuity, and relentless determination. As Marines landed on the black sands and began the grueling climb toward fortified positions, the question was not merely which side would hold the ground, but whether conventional military thinking or audacious innovation would dictate the island's fate. The cliffs loomed, the caves yawned like silent sentinels, and the air, thick with tension, seemed to whisper a single warning. The battle to come would redefine expectations of warfare in mountainous terrain. The Americans faced a logistical and tactical challenge unlike any in the Pacific. The volcanic ridges of Iwo Jima were steep, jagged, and unstable, littered with boulders and loose ash that threatened to swallow vehicles whole. Conventional wisdom held that tanks were designed for open fields or gently rolling terrain, not for climbing cliffs under enemy fire. Yet commanders were unwilling to concede any advantage to the defenders. Every element of the assault was analyzed with painstaking detail. How to position artillery to suppress ridge defenses, how infantry could coordinate with armor, and most crucially, how to get tanks to the heights where the Japanese positions dominated. Engineering units worked tirelessly to modify Sherman tanks for the impossible climb. Tracks were widened to distribute weight across soft volcanic soil, engines were overhauled for greater torque, and suspensions were reinforced to handle sudden drops and jagged rock. Flamethrower tanks were outfitted to clear cave entrances, while demolition charges were readied to collapse hidden tunnels. Each adjustment was tested on mock ridges, simulating the uneven terrain Marines would encounter. The goal was not simply to transport tanks. It was to create a mobile platform capable of direct assault against fortified positions where infantry alone could not survive. Training became equally intensive. Marines practiced climbing inclines while coordinating with armored units, learning how to signal positions, anticipate movement, and provide cover. Exercises emphasized improvisation, finding paths where none seemed possible, maintaining communication under fire, and trusting the tanks to hold when exposed. Officers stressed that innovation was the only path to victory. Soldiers internalized this mantra, understanding that their survival and success depended on defying assumptions about terrain and technology. Meanwhile, Japanese observers continued to underestimate the possibility of armored assault. They had fortified every ridge, dug deep into the rock, and prepared overlapping fields of fire. Artillery and machine gun positions were positioned to dominate every approach. In their calculations, the steep inclines of Mount Suribachi and surrounding ridges would channel attacking infantry into kill zones. No one expected tanks to appear where the natural topography was supposed to make such attacks impossible. American intelligence highlighted the paradox. Every previous campaign suggested tanks would be ineffective, yet aerial reconnaissance and captured Japanese documents revealed vulnerabilities in ridge defenses. Small gaps between fortifications, narrow paths along cliffs, and concealed approaches offered potential avenues for armored support. It was a calculated risk, but the commanders concluded that these gaps, combined with engineering ingenuity and infantry coordination, could turn the tide. As the invasion drew closer, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would test the limits of conventional warfare. Japanese forces reinforced the island's natural defenses, confident in the superiority of terrain, yet unaware of the innovations being developed just beyond the horizon. The Americans, conversely, moved forward with a blend of technical adaptation and rigorous training, determined to demonstrate that no mountain, no matter how jagged, could entirely negate armored firepower. The contrast was stark. Defenders relying on centuries of accumulated knowledge and natural advantage, attackers embracing experimentation, technology, and audacity. Each day of preparation brought the Marines closer to a moment that would confound expectations, challenge doctrine, and force Japanese commanders to confront a reality they had never imagined. Tanks moving over mountains, reshaping the battlefield from top to bottom, and with this tension mounting, the story shifts to the multiple perspectives that define the battle. The human courage, leadership decisions, technological innovations, and tactical surprises that converged on the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima. The first angle is human. On the slopes of Iwo Jima, Marines faced terrain that seemed to defy all logic. Each step was a struggle against loose volcanic ash and jagged rocks, while enemy fire erupted from concealed positions. Soldiers carried heavy packs, weapons, and grenades, constantly scanning for Japanese snipers or machine gun nests. Amid this chaos, the arrival of tanks was both a relief and a source of awe. Infantrymen watched as armored vehicles crested ridges they had assumed were unclimbable, steel hulks crushing obstacles in their path. The sight boosted morale, providing a tangible promise that their advance could be supported, that they were not alone against the entrenched defenders. Fear remained, but it was tempered by the extraordinary demonstration of human ingenuity and coordination. The second angle is leadership. American commanders, including Major General Harry Schmidt and Admiral Richmond K. Turner, recognized that conventional tactics would lead to catastrophic casualties. They had observed previous assaults, where infantry had been decimated by entrenched defenders. Leadership at every level emphasized careful planning, detailed reconnaissance, and bold experimentation. Decisions were made to challenge assumptions about terrain, to integrate tanks in ways that military doctrine had long considered impossible. Leaders communicated constantly with engineers, infantry officers, and tank crews, orchestrating a synchronized assault. This combination of calculated risk and precise coordination reflected a shift in military thinking, one that valued adaptability as much as raw firepower. The third angle is tactical. Japanese commanders had established kill zones where infantry would be trapped under overlapping fields of fire. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery positions were strategically placed to dominate every approach. Yet, the Americans introduced a disruptive element. Armored vehicles moving where no one expected. Tanks could carry flame projectors or demolition charges directly into positions that were previously unreachable. This forced defenders to reconsider their lines of fire, divert attention from other areas, and respond to threats they had assumed impossible. Tactics evolved in real time, as Marines adapted to the combined presence of infantry and armor, exploiting gaps and neutralizing fortified positions with unprecedented efficiency. The fourth angle is technological. Sherman tanks were not standard models. Each had been modified for climbing, maneuvering, and survival in volcanic terrain. Wider tracks reduced ground pressure, allowing vehicles to grip loose ash. Reinforced suspensions absorbed the impact of rocky inclines. Flamethrower tanks and demolition carriers extended capabilities beyond simple mobility. Every technical adjustment reflected careful study and anticipation of challenges. Japanese forces, unaware of these modifications, faced machines capable of assaulting positions they had considered impregnable. The technology itself became a psychological weapon, demonstrating that innovation could redefine the limits of warfare. Each of these angles, human, leadership, tactical, technological, intersected on the battlefield. Soldiers and commanders alike were tested by the physical and mental demands of combat. While technology and tactics challenged long-held assumptions, the combination created moments of improvisation, courage, and extraordinary coordination, shaping the unfolding narrative of the battle. The impact was immediate and visible. Infantrymen advanced with support they had never expected. Commanders adjusted strategies in real time, and the Japanese defenders faced an unfamiliar threat that forced constant adaptation. The presence of tanks on mountains was more than a mechanical achievement. It was a demonstration of audacity, planning, and resolve, a tangible turning point in how the battle was waged and perceived. These intertwined perspectives highlight the multidimensional nature of the assault. Bravery under fire, calculated command decisions, tactical innovation, and technological ingenuity converged to challenge expectations. And as the battle progressed, new angles would emerge. Moral questions, enemy adaptations, and the broader strategic implications, pushing the narrative toward the decisive moments to come. The fifth angle is the enemy's perspective. Japanese commanders had spent months fortifying every ridge, tunnel, and cave, confident that the mountainous terrain would serve as an unbreachable barrier. They had studied maps, calculated lines of fire, and trained their troops to repel amphibious assaults. When the first Sherman tanks appeared over the ridges, their disbelief was immediate. Commanders had assumed the heavy vehicles would be confined to the beaches, vulnerable to concentrated fire. Now, armored units threatened positions that were considered safe, undermining confidence and forcing rapid adaptation. Soldiers in these fortified positions faced a new type of pressure. Not only were they under fire, but the very assumptions of their defensive strategy had been shattered. The sixth angle is moral. Both sides were confronted with the human consequences of innovation in warfare. Marines advanced under the belief that armored support reduced casualties, yet they were acutely aware of the dangers inherent in climbing volcanic ridges under fire. Japanese defenders, meanwhile, were forced to reconsider the futility of certain positions, creating moral tension between duty and survival. Commanders on both sides were aware that every decision carried immediate, often fatal consequences, highlighting the human cost embedded in technological and tactical advancements. The presence of tanks on mountains amplified these stakes, forcing individuals to confront extreme danger in unprecedented circumstances. The seventh angle is strategic. The ability to move tanks over mountainous terrain was not just a battlefield novelty, it redefined operational planning. American commanders realized that fortified positions previously considered invulnerable could now be targeted, enabling faster advances and more decisive victories. Japanese leaders, by contrast, were compelled to redistribute forces, reconsider defensive priorities, and anticipate American ingenuity in future operations. The tactic demonstrated that flexibility and engineering innovation could alter the balance of power even when facing entrenched, experienced opponents. The eighth angle is logistical. Moving heavy armored vehicles over volcanic slopes required meticulous preparation. Fuel supply lines had to be secured, maintenance crews positioned for rapid repairs, and engineers ready to remove obstacles or create improvised paths. Communication between infantry and armor became critical, with radio coordination, signal flares, and forward observers ensuring that tanks were effectively integrated into assault plans. The successful deployment of armor in such terrain was as much a triumph of organization as it was of technology or courage. Without precise logistics, the audacious plan could have failed before tanks even reached enemy positions. Together, these perspectives reveal the full complexity of the battle. Human courage, leadership decisions, tactical innovation, technological adaptation, enemy reactions, moral dilemmas, strategic consequences, and logistical mastery all converged on Iwo Jima's volcanic slopes. Each angle reinforced the others, creating a dynamic and unpredictable battlefield where assumptions were constantly tested, and conventional thinking could no longer guarantee success. By examining these angles, It becomes clear why the use of tanks on mountains was not simply a technical achievement. It was a multidimensional breakthrough that challenged doctrine, reshaped the battlefield, and forced both sides to confront realities that defied expectation. The convergence of these factors set the stage for the decisive moments that would define the assault, culminating in breakthroughs that would alter the course of the battle. The first armored assault on Iwo Jima's ridges began with cautious precision. Sherman tanks, modified for the volcanic slopes, advanced alongside infantry units, each movement carefully calculated to avoid loose boulders and sudden drops. Marines followed, rifles and grenades ready, eyes fixed on the fortified positions above. Smoke from naval bombardments hung low, mixing with the ash and dust kicked up by the tank's treads. Every inch of progress was a struggle. The terrain fought back as fiercely as the defenders. Japanese troops, entrenched in caves and behind rock formations, opened fire with machine guns, mortars, and artillery. The impact of enemy rounds rattled the tanks, sending vibrations through armored hulls, yet the vehicles continued their climb. Flamethrower tanks cleared cave entrances, forcing defenders into the open, while demolition carriers toppled concealed positions that had seemed untouchable. The sight of steel behemoths ascending cliffs shocked both sides. For Marines, it was a symbol of protection and momentum. For Japanese soldiers, a reality that challenged every assumption about the battlefield. Leadership decisions were tested in real time. Officers directed tank crews over narrow ridges, signaling movements with precise hand gestures or radios. Infantry units adapted to the armored advance, adjusting positions to exploit suppressed Japanese fire. Coordination between units became a living demonstration of tactical innovation. Smoke screens, suppressive fire, and armored support blended seamlessly, creating temporary pockets of safety in otherwise lethal terrain. The human element was equally critical. Tank crews climbed steep inclines, muscles straining, aware that a misstep could immobilize the vehicle and expose it to concentrated fire. Marines climbed alongside them, carrying heavy packs and weaponry over loose volcanic ash, often under direct fire. Fear and adrenaline coexisted, pushing soldiers to act with extraordinary determination. Moments of improvisation, rerouting tanks around impassable boulders, Marines laying makeshift ramps, proved decisive in maintaining the advance. Technological innovation, the product of months of engineering, was fully tested. Reinforced suspensions absorbed the uneven terrain, wider tracks distributed weight across soft volcanic ash, and engines roared under the strain of climbing angles once thought insurmountable. Flamethrower tanks and demolition carriers neutralized positions that had previously stopped infantry cold. Every mechanical success reinforced the confidence of the advancing forces, demonstrating that preparation, adaptation, and ingenuity could overcome natural and man-made obstacles alike. By midday, the first ridges had been breached. Japanese defenders had been forced to retreat into deeper caves, or were neutralized by coordinated attacks. The combination of armor and infantry shattered the carefully constructed kill zones that had dominated the beachheads. Commanders on both sides recognized the implications. Terrain could no longer dictate outcomes entirely, and innovation could redefine the battlefield in ways previously unimaginable. The noise of battle, gunfire, explosions, tank engines, was punctuated by moments of eerie silence as soldiers caught glimpses of what had been achieved. Marines peered over ridges, realizing that positions once deemed impregnable were now accessible, while Japanese officers attempted to reorganize defenses under an unprecedented threat. The battlefield was no longer static. The rules of engagement had changed in real time. This initial breakthrough was not without cost. Casualties mounted, vehicles were damaged, and every advance required meticulous attention to both terrain and enemy fire. Yet the psychological impact was immense. Marines moved with renewed determination, Tanks continued to crest ridges that had previously been a source of terror, and Japanese forces confronted a reality that defied their expectations. The success of these first assaults laid the groundwork for deeper advances into the volcanic interior. Every ridge taken, every fortified position neutralized, reinforced the lesson that careful planning, technological innovation, and human courage could overcome even the most formidable natural defenses. And as the Marines pressed onward, the battle was poised to reach its decisive moment, the point at which American ingenuity would irrevocably alter the island's fate. As the assault pressed deeper into Iwo Jima's volcanic ridges, the battlefield transformed into a crucible of fire, smoke, and steel. Sherman tanks continued to climb where terrain should have been impassable, their treads grinding against jagged rocks and loose volcanic ash. Infantry followed closely, using the armored advance as cover while clearing Japanese positions with grenades and suppressive fire. Every ridge taken was a victory. Every fortification neutralized, a testament to planning, coordination, and sheer determination. Japanese commanders scrambled to respond. General Kuribayashi, recognizing the unprecedented threat, ordered troops to abandon certain ridges and consolidate forces in deeper caves and tunnels. Defensive fire shifted unpredictably, attempting to exploit any misstep by tanks or Marines, yet the Americans adapted in real time. Flamethrower tanks and demolition carriers were directed to cave entrances, forcing defenders to the open where infantry could engage. The meticulous fortifications that had been a source of confidence were now liabilities. The defenders' assumptions about terrain had been shattered. Leadership under fire became a decisive factor. Tank commanders calculated angles of ascent, while under machine gun fire, signaling movements to infantry and engineers. Marines coordinated closely, adjusting flanking maneuvers as armored units created new opportunities. Forward observers directed artillery strikes on remaining fortified positions, ensuring that every layer of defense was engaged simultaneously. Decisions that would have seemed reckless in theory became necessary in practice, and the ability of American commanders to integrate technology, infantry, and firepower determined the pace of the advance. The human element remained central. Soldiers climbed ridges already scarred by bombardments, the weight of weapons and packs compounded by exhaustion and fear. Tank crews risked immobilization or direct hits, yet the success of each climb reinforced confidence across the units. Japanese soldiers, aware of the impossibility of their position, faced mounting psychological pressure. Some retreated into deeper tunnels, others fought to the last man. The battle was as much about morale and mental resilience as it was about strategy and firepower. Technological innovation continued to prove decisive. Modified Sherman tanks could handle inclines and irregular terrain previously deemed impassable. Flamethrowers and demolition devices allowed the Americans to neutralize hidden threats without exposing infantry to concentrated fire. The combination of armor and infantry disrupted Japanese defensive plans, breaking down the carefully constructed network of kill zones. Every successful climb, every fortified position destroyed, reinforced the realization that the Americans had redefined the limits of what armored warfare could achieve in mountainous terrain. By late in the day, the Americans had achieved a breakthrough. Key ridges were secured, tunnels and caves were systematically cleared, and Japanese forces were pushed back into the island's interior. The battlefield was no longer dominated by terrain. It was dominated by the integration of human ingenuity, leadership, and technological adaptation. The once impregnable cliffs had become pathways for assault, and the defenders were forced into reactive, improvised measures. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. Commanders faced the harsh reality that terrain alone could no longer guarantee defensive success. Troops accustomed to holding high ground with confidence now encountered a relentless enemy, capable of negating the advantages of cliffs, caves, and fortifications. The unexpected presence of tanks on mountains undermined morale, forcing a recalibration of tactics under extreme pressure. For the Americans, the breakthrough was both tactical and symbolic. Every ridge captured demonstrated the value of preparation, experimentation, and bold execution. Marines and tank crews had achieved what Japanese commanders had considered impossible, and the momentum shifted decisively. The battle was far from over, but the first true turning point had arrived. Terrain no longer dictated the pace or outcome of the fight, and innovation had claimed its victory. As night fell over Iwo Jima, the first armored units consolidated their positions atop the ridges. Smoke still lingered, ash covered every surface, and the island bore the scars of relentless struggle. Yet in these moments, it became clear that the course of the battle had changed irreversibly. The Marines had proven that no mountain was insurmountable, and the Japanese defenders were confronting a reality that would shape every subsequent decision. The capture of Iwo Jima's ridges marked a turning point in the battle, but the cost was evident in every cratered slope and shattered bunker. American forces had demonstrated that tanks could conquer terrain previously thought impossible, yet the island remained fiercely contested. Casualties were high on both sides, with Marines bearing the physical toll of climbing and advancing under relentless fire, and Japanese defenders entrenched deep in tunnels and caves, fighting with the resolve of those defending their homeland. The immediate tactical outcome was clear. Positions that had been considered impregnable were now under American control, allowing infantry and armored units to consolidate and press deeper into the volcanic interior. Artillery observers reported improved fields of fire. Supply lines became more secure, and units could maneuver with greater confidence. Tanks had neutralized key Japanese fortifications, and their presence disrupted enemy defensive patterns, forcing retreat and reorganization. Every ridge taken not only opened new avenues of advance, but also reinforced the psychological advantage held by the attackers. Japanese forces faced a stark reality. Generals and officers who had meticulously planned the island's defenses recognized that terrain alone could no longer dictate outcomes. Troops accustomed to controlling high ground now confronted an enemy capable of climbing cliffs and neutralizing fortified positions. Communications between units became chaotic as small pockets of defenders were isolated by armored maneuvers, and morale began to fracture. Reports from surviving Japanese soldiers emphasized shock and disbelief. Tanks on ridges where none were expected had shattered both strategy and confidence. For the Americans, the battle provided critical lessons in combined arms coordination. The integration of infantry, armor, flamethrowers, demolition units, and artillery demonstrated the effectiveness of meticulous planning, engineering innovation, and flexible command. Forward observers and unit leaders adjusted tactics on the fly, capitalizing on the momentum generated by armored breakthroughs. The success of tanks in mountainous terrain validated months of preparation, modifications, and training, proving that ingenuity could overcome even the harshest environmental obstacles. Human experience remained central to understanding the aftermath. Marines recounted the exhaustion and fear of advancing under fire, the terror of jagged ridges, and the relief and awe inspired by tanks cresting cliffs beside them. Japanese soldiers described moments of disbelief, followed by grim acceptance of their shifting tactical situation. Leadership, morale, and adaptability had been tested to the limits, revealing the capacity for resilience and determination on both sides. The psychological impact of armored vehicles on cliffs, steel monsters defying natural barriers, was as significant as the physical destruction they inflicted. Strategically, the ridge assaults opened new possibilities for the American campaign. With high ground secured, supply routes could be established more efficiently, artillery could be positioned with greater effect, and subsequent assaults could proceed with improved coordination. The success challenged conventional assumptions about armored warfare, demonstrating that innovation and careful planning could expand the operational reach of forces even in the most extreme environments. The terrain itself, once a formidable defensive ally for the Japanese, had been partially neutralized by human ingenuity. Cliffs and ridges, previously considered natural fortresses, now served as pathways for continued assault. Each captured position created a domino effect, forcing Japanese commanders to consolidate forces and abandon less tenable positions, further shaping the battlefield in favor of the attackers. As night fell on the first major breakthrough, the Marines secured positions that would serve as staging points for deeper advances. The combination of engineering, courage, and tactical coordination had reshaped the operational landscape. And yet, the battle was far from complete. The Japanese still controlled sections of the island, and the struggle for dominance would continue, setting the stage for the final consequences of this audacious assault. The effectiveness of tanks on ridges, the disruption of Japanese defensive doctrine, and the human resilience displayed by both sides now converged to define the next phase of the battle. The immediate aftermath highlighted both victory and cost, demonstrating that innovation and preparation could achieve extraordinary results even in the harshest conditions. The long-term consequences of the armored assaults over Iwo Jima's ridges became apparent in both strategic and human terms. The ability to deploy tanks on terrain previously deemed impassable altered military thinking in the Pacific and beyond. Commanders realized that natural barriers could be overcome with engineering, preparation, and adaptability. Japanese defensive doctrine, which had relied heavily on terrain advantage, required reassessment, and the lessons of Iwo Jima would influence subsequent operations in the Pacific Campaign. Casualty reports painted a grim picture. American forces suffered thousands of casualties, with Marines and armored crews enduring brutal conditions on steep, rocky slopes. Japanese losses were devastating, compounded by the inability to effectively defend positions that had once been considered secure. Survivors described entire ridges falling to coordinated infantry and tank attacks, forcing retreats into deeper tunnels where supplies and communication were limited. The attritional nature of the battle highlighted the human cost of both ingenuity and obstinate defense, underscoring the relentless brutality of island warfare. The material impact was significant as well. Sherman tanks had performed beyond expectations, but many were damaged or destroyed during the assaults. Engineering units worked continuously to repair vehicles and clear debris, ensuring that the armored advance could continue. The success of these modified tanks validated the months of preparation, modifications, and specialized training, but also underscored the limits of even the most well-planned operations under extreme conditions. Psychologically, the effects rippled through both sides. American troops gained confidence from witnessing the impossible achieved, the sight of tanks. Ascending cliffs and neutralizing fortified positions inspired courage and reinforced trust in leadership and equipment. Japanese troops, meanwhile, were forced into a state of constant recalibration, adjusting to a battlefield that no longer favored their assumptions. Commanders had to make rapid decisions under pressure, often sacrificing positions to preserve manpower, while soldiers grappled with the demoralizing reality that terrain alone could no longer secure their defense. Strategically, the breakthrough on the ridges facilitated deeper advances into the island's interior. Captured positions allowed for more secure supply lines, artillery placements, and staging areas for subsequent assaults. The combination of armor and infantry neutralized key fortifications and reduced the effectiveness of defensive networks that had been considered near impenetrable. The operation demonstrated that innovation, coordination, and audacity could redefine the operational landscape, even in one of the most hostile environments encountered in the Pacific War. Reports and accounts from both sides emphasized the transformative nature of the assault. American observers noted that tanks on mountains had not only provided tactical advantage, but also served as a psychological weapon, breaking the will of entrenched defenders. Japanese records reflected astonishment and a grudging respect for the ingenuity of the opposing forces, even amid the devastation inflicted on their units. The clash between doctrine, terrain, and innovation became a defining moment in the campaign. By the conclusion of this phase, the island had been partially secured, but the struggle continued. The successes of the armored assaults had altered the battlefield, yet complete victory demanded continued effort, coordination, and sacrifice. The integration of technology, human courage, leadership, and logistics had reshaped expectations and demonstrated that determined adaptation could overcome even the most formidable natural defenses. The battle for Iwo Jima's ridges left an enduring legacy. It proved that innovation could overcome traditional assumptions, that technology could redefine terrain, and that human determination could exploit opportunities even in the harshest conditions. The immediate gains, captured ridges, disrupted defenses, and improved operational mobility, combined with the broader lessons for military strategy to create a lasting impact on the conduct of warfare in the Pacific. And with these consequences clear, the story turns to reflection, an assessment of what this battle meant for history, for innovation, and for the human experience in one of the most challenging theaters of World War II. The battle for Iwo Jima's ridges revealed a profound truth about warfare. Assumptions, no matter how long held, can be challenged by innovation, courage, and determination. The Japanese had relied on the natural fortifications of volcanic ridges, confident that terrain alone could dictate the outcome. The Americans proved otherwise. Tanks, modified and daringly deployed, moved over cliffs once thought impassable, transforming the battlefield and redefining what was possible in military operations. Beyond tactics and technology, the human element shaped the outcome. Marines faced exhaustion, fear, and the constant threat of death, yet pressed forward with relentless discipline. Tank crews and infantry coordinated under fire, improvising paths, clearing obstacles, and supporting one another in a display of resilience and teamwork. On the other side, Japanese defenders confronted the collapse of carefully constructed plans, forced into reactive positions, and tested to the limits of morale and ingenuity. The confrontation highlighted the intersection of human courage, leadership, and adaptation in extreme circumstances. Strategically, the implications extended far beyond a single island. The success of armored assaults on mountains challenged conventional doctrine, influencing future Pacific operations and reshaping military thinking about terrain, technology, and flexibility. Commanders learned that obstacles, whether natural or man-made, could be overcome with preparation, creativity, and audacity. The battle became a case study in the integration of innovation, planning, and execution under the harshest conditions. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson is philosophical. Iwo Jima's ridges remind us that human limits are often defined less by physical constraints than by imagination and will. In the crucible of war, the impossible can become achievable when skill, determination, and ingenuity converge. The volcanic slopes, once a fortress for one side, became a proving ground for the other, illustrating that even the harshest environment cannot entirely resist innovation and human resolve. The echoes of this battle remain not only in historical records and photographs, but in the understanding that courage and creativity, when applied with precision, can redefine expectations. The Marines who climbed those ridges and the engineers who adapted machines to defy nature left a legacy that continues to shape the study of warfare and the appreciation of human resilience. In the end, the battle was not just about terrain or tanks. It was about the enduring capacity of humans to overcome the seemingly impossible.